Welcome to MULCH, the podcast for flower farmers who love growing beautiful things and want to build a business that lasts. I'm your host, Rebecca Anning-Brown from Silver Grey Foliage in Yorkshire, and every week we'll get real about what it takes to grow flowers for a living, from the planning and the planting to the mindset and the money. Whether you're just starting out or a few seasons in, you'll find honest conversations and practical ideas to help you to root your business in firm soil. Thank you for listening. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It really will help more flower farmers to get on and grow. Let's dig in. Hello and welcome back to MULCH. How are you? I'm feeling quite pleased with myself at this particular moment in time because I got up and I went for a run this morning and it didn't feel hard. Now that's the run part actually that didn't feel hard. Getting out of bed this morning wasn't particularly easy. I quite like my bed once I'm snoozy and warm and cosy, but it was well worth it. I felt good afterwards and I'm still feeling the positive effects now, so that's really good for a Friday. Even though it did snow on Wednesday morning when I got to the field, we've had 3 full days that I would consider to be dry weather. Hurrah! Hurrah! Some dry weather. How's it been by you? I hope that you have got some drier weather and that you're able to grasp your soil and not squeeze it and see drips of water just pouring out. It's soul destroying knowing that your soil just isn't ready for planting yet. So I'm here feeling your pain and just mindful of the need for the rain to stop for a little while. I thought I'd start today by reading out a couple of the messages from last week's podcast. So I love it when you guys respond, when you share the podcast in your stories on Instagram, when you leave a review, and I love it when you leave a comment as well. Because I really do read them all, and because it's encouraging to see the support and the kind of outcome of the work that we do here on MULCH. So 2 of the comments. The first one is from Hattie, who said, "Great episode, very wise words indeed. Thank you, Hattie." And the second one is from somebody called O'Airley, I think. Maybe O'Airley, but I think it's O'Airley. So stop buying seeds is what it says with some celebration marks. This is sage advice. Thank you. I've already bought a bunch of random seeds. My collection is out of control. This is a thing I'm going to have to learn for definite. Thanks for sharing this and for letting me know that what's mine will always be mine, not everyone else's. So last week's episode was about February and February wobbles on the flower farm. If you haven't heard it, if you haven't listened to it, go and check it out after this one. Thank you to everybody who's made comments last week and on previous weeks. I will try and read a few more out in the weeks to come, and hopefully you will find them encouraging too. Before we dig into this week's episode, I'd also like to say a thank you. Thank you for your orders this week. We've sent out a few Flower Farmers planners. They're undated, so you can actually start them at any point in the year. A couple of the business planning kits have been downloaded, and lots of you have also ordered the cut flower meadow seeds that we have on sale. So the cut flower meadow seeds are a bit of fun. They're all our own saved seed from our flower farm, Silver Grey Foliage in Yorkshire. They're all last season seeds, so collected across the second half of 2025. And they're germinating really, really successfully for us, which is fabulous. So if you've got spare pots or a patch in your garden and you'd like a more laissez-faire approach than the one we normally take to flower farming, an approach that will also attract bees into your garden and birds with the seed heads later on in the year, and also offer you some cutting material, head over to our website and check out the shop. Okay, today's episode is all about flower farmer self-care, which is a subject that is really, really close to my heart. It's something I'm really passionate about. We're talking about the hands, our hands, and it's a mixture of health, safety and well-being. And it's so relevant to your flower farming business because we need our hands. I know that health and safety is so much less exciting and interesting than flowers or pricing or seeds. But if we don't look after ourselves, then there's no purpose to having flowers. And there's also no purpose to having sensible pricing strategies if you're not physically well enough to cut and sell them. So we're going to talk today about our hands from the outside in. So we're talking about the skin, the muscles, bones, and joints broadly, but mainly the bones. So let's start with the skin. So when I talk about skin, lots of the principles can be applied across all of our skin. There are definitely specifics for other parts of the body, and the conflict between those principles and our overall health is something that we address slightly later on in today's episode. However, today we're thinking about the skin on our hands. Actually, that made me think, first of all, about flower farmers who have beautiful nails. I think it's hard to maintain beautiful nails given the work that we do, and so I am always in awe and admiration of beautiful nails on Instagram and elsewhere with flower farmers. That's like 10 out of 10 for flower farmer self-care in terms of things that make you happy and bring you joy. There's a tendency amongst flower farmers, because our hands are at the forefront of the work that we do, to just accept that they won't be beautiful. And I probably do fall into that camp. However, I do really, really look after my hands. So a relevant story, a bit of a segue, is right at the beginning of our flower farming journey, in the first week of Lent of that year, so it was 2019, I had a kitchen-related accident on Shrove Tuesday. I was lifting a terracotta jar that at the time we kept sugar in, we don't anymore, and I was lifting it into the cupboard. It was on a shelf at the time, and as I did so, the jar broke in my left hand. Now, if you're squeamish, probably good to close your ears right now, because those fragments of terracotta cut my left index finger right at the bottom, then all the way up my finger, and it cut all of the tendons to my left index finger and the nerves as well. So that's the things that allow me to bend my finger, stretch my finger, move it, and also to feel. And the border next to your thumb of your index finger is actually really important in terms of feeling and keeping you safe. So a really, really damaging place to injure yourself. I went to hospital. It was operated on a couple of days later, and they did a really good job. However, the extent of the injury meant that it took me a few years, like a good 3 years, to have sensation back to the whole of my finger. And I sadly only actually have about 50% of the range of movement of a normal index finger on that side. Why is this important? Well, without my hands, I can't feel the soil and its texture. Without my hands, I can't sell seeds. Without my hands, I can't plant my seedlings or bigger plants. I can't cut, I can't carry. Our hands are so vital to the manual and sensory job that we do. I really do think they're the most important place to start when I'm thinking about self-care. So what does that look like practically? Well, interestingly, I'm going to start with the skin. And in terms of the skin, I'm thinking about protecting our skin and the outerwear. So pretty much that means gloves. Also means hand cream, but it means gloves first of all. And just thinking about prevention always being better than a cure. Personally, I really like a lightweight glove because that gives me a good sense of dexterity, so use of my fingers still. And honestly, I don't wear gloves all the time because I like to feel the soil. I do think there's a genuine well-being and health benefit to me by having my hands physically touching the soil. But gloves as a protective layer are the first thing to mention. Thinking about it laterally, we buy tons of compost every year, and even though it's from green waste, there are always pieces of glass and small sharp things in it. So the main reason that I do wear gloves is to protect myself from the unintentional contents of the soil. The second reason is to protect my hands from the 7,000 different types of manure that we add to our beds, because I don't want my hands to get infected. So if I do have cracks or any damage to my skin, I'm actually more fastidious about wearing gloves because I don't want any of that mark in any cracks and I don't want infections in my hands. Often people think that the reason that I would wear gloves when handling soil contents is to prevent the transmission of infection from the soil into my body. But hand hygiene and keeping my hands out of my mouth is really, really ingrained into me from my clinical practice. And so that's not something that I personally worry about. What do I worry about if I'm protecting the skin on my hands? I worry about my skin breaking down, and I worry about it becoming infected. So I do become more interested in gloves when it's extremely windy and cold, to prevent the kind of drying out and chapping, so breakage, or when it's really wet and cold. And I actually find wet and cold to be more damaging than dry and windy and cold, because it softens the upper layer of your skin and it makes you much more likely to scratch and excoriate your skin, and therefore it's much more likely, in my experience, to cause your skin to crack, to break down, to be a bit sore, and therefore susceptible to infection. You'll notice that I'm wearing gloves as a form of prevention rather than the form of cure. And that's because it's so hard to fix sore hands that you use every day and that you're physically moving every day. And therefore, if there is any damage, the physical act of moving your hands is making it worse. Prevention is definitely the way forward. So being aware of the conditions that make your skin more likely to break down, more likely to be damaged, is really important, and being mindful of using gloves, especially in those situations and then everywhere else as well, will help you to do that. So prevention, in my mind, is always better than cure. It's inevitable in the work that we do that your hands will get wet. So the final part of the skin conversation, before we consider hand creams, and I'm going to ask for your recommendations because everybody uses something different, but the final part of the conversation is about making sure that your hands stay dry. So when you're in gloves, sometimes your hands will get sweaty. And we've talked about the rain already, and in the heat, or if you've applied hand cream, actually your hands can get quite sweaty. And it's really important to make sure that your hands are washed and then dried really thoroughly in all the cracks and crevices to make sure that it doesn't break down in those areas. So it's the areas that are wet that then get wind blown over them, or the areas that are wet and then kind of held together as you're using your secateurs, that are much more likely to get sore and irritated and then to break down. And again, because we do this all the time, it's really difficult to get on top of it without a complete break, which is difficult to do. So my advice is just make sure that you're keeping those hands really dry in between times. Now, I'm hesitant before talking about skin cream because I have a really boring and basic routine. I make sure my hands are clean after I've used them. I make sure my hands are thoroughly dried if they've got wet. And all I use on my skin at the moment is Nivea. Now, this is not an advert and I'm not sponsored by Nivea, but that's my personal chosen preference. At the moment, my skin is looking really lovely. The other thing that I've tried that does really well for me is the Hard Work O'Keeffe type cream. Really thick. It almost leaves a waxy layer on your skin as a form of protection. For me, best applied at night, and in the morning my hands feel so much better. I would love it if you would reply with comments and recommendations for your preferred hand cream, and I will read those out to share with our listeners next week so that we can all benefit from each other's learning. Okay, so it's a bit of time talking about skin, but the second thing to talk about when we're considering our hands is the muscles. So I am not going to do a full anatomy conversation here, but I do want to say this. Strong hands start with strong arms. I talk a lot about looking after our bodies and wellness through the winter and through the season, and that's because it's all related. As you move from your shoulders down through your arms and into your hands, it doesn't take a genius to work out that the muscles get smaller and smaller. So that's the obvious part. But what's less obvious is that from an anatomical perspective, the tendons that make your hands grip things, hold on to things, and allow your fingers to move smoothly don't originate from your hands. They originate from your elbows and your forearms. So, to have strong hands, you need to work on your forearms and in turn on your upper arms to strengthen the tendons and muscles. as well as the small muscles in your hand. Now, I'm not a physio, and specific medical advice is outside of the scope of this podcast. However, as a flower farmer, this is part of our self-care to keep us working and to prevent us from being injured. So, a quick Google will help you to find some easy and repeatable exercises for your forearms and also for your hands. In my view, it is not enough to say I use my secateurs regularly. That will be enough. Why? Because that will use particular muscles, that will make particular muscles stronger than others, and actually that puts you at risk of having tension because of an imbalance. What you need to be doing is looking at the overall muscle strength across the whole of your arm so that you are providing a continuous chain of strength from your shoulder down to the tips of your fingers. Finally, let's talk about the bones in our hands. I think, for me, this is actually probably the most interesting because the first part of bone health is nutrition, which directs us to think about having enough calcium and vitamin D in our bodies. And in turn, that speaks to the need for adequate sunlight exposure. So there's a huge conflict, and I referred to this earlier. There's a huge conflict here. Because we work outdoors and we know that UV exposure from all that time outside causes skin cancer. And so the advice for skin protection and care is to cover up and to wear plenty of sun cream, which in turn hinders our vitamin D creation and manufacture within the body. Now, this is not a blind-tested, double-blind, triple-blind study, but I know of 3 flower farmers who work outdoors and have done for many years, but have vitamin D deficiencies. So 3 isn't many, but I do wonder if we paid attention to what was going on, how many more flower farmers we'd find who follow the rules about self-protection in order to prevent or reduce the risk of skin cancer, and in so doing wind up with low vitamin D levels. Again, this isn't significant research, but it's enough to be helping us to ask the questions that we need to ask, or to look for the signs and symptoms to check out whether or not we have any signs of vitamin D deficiency. So in the show notes, I've added a link to a really nice NHS hospital advice leaflet on vitamin D deficiency. It tells you about good sources of vitamin D, that you can add to your diet. It also tells you about the signs and symptoms to look out for that may or may not be signs of vitamin D deficiency. This is not a medical podcast. This is here for your health and well-being as flower farmers. Please don't self-medicate. If you're worried that you have signs or symptoms of vitamin D deficiency, contact your GP, seek advice, and proceed from there. So this is the first episode of Mulch that's gone beyond mindset and generalised well-being when talking about health and safety for us as flower farmers, and I'm really curious to know what your thoughts and responses are. I would absolutely love it if you would share this episode with your flower farming friends in your Instagram posts or stories. I would love it if you would leave a comment. I would love it if you would share your preferences on hand creams and gloves, because then I can share them with everybody else who's listening and the news and the benefits can go further. I'll read the recommendations out next week. I hope lots of them. Okay, I'll be back next week with another episode of Mulch about flower farming in practice, and I look forward to being with you then. Rebecca. Thank you for listening to Mulch today. Don't forget to subscribe and to share the podcast with your flower farming friends. I'll be back next week, helping you to firm your flower farming roots with real and practical flower farming insights and advice. Rebecca.